There you have it, Safeguarding the Future of Public Funds and Sustainable Investments, with 4 eloquent speakers who I'll invite not just yet, but in a moment. Just to give you a heads up, in this 55-minute session, we're going to focus on the vital role, I think you'd probably agree from what you've heard at the outset, the vital role of clean contracting in ensuring the success of the EU's recovery and, of course, the ongoing green transition. So we're going to set the stage for a kind of broader conversation about the societal impact of enhanced transparency, accountability, and integrity in what we can describe as the largest public procurement market in the world. So we're going to ask, how can the prevention of fraud and corruption foster better decision making and improve, and we heard that there again from our first speaker, Delia, improve our day-to-day lives? Are we deploying all the available tools to match citizens' expectations of good governance and better decision making in their region, in their locality? How can the EU and national authorities amplify the role of civil society to help mitigate the risks and solve the challenges and collectively safeguard the public funds? There's some big words in there, some big challenges. Don't forget, you can pose a short, and I mean super short, question or comment in the chat channel, and I will endeavour to put one to each speaker. But let me please invite those speakers to join us all. Hello, it's so lovely to have you here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, I said to you, our job is to make all our lovely audience feel as though we're in the same room. So that's what we'll endeavour to do. I've grilled you within an inch of your lives about being concise, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. What I do want to do is turn first to the Director of Regional Policy at the European Commission, Sofia Alves. So I'll turn to you first. Now, you are responsible for administrative capacity building and programmes implementation in DG Regio, but you have been head of cabinet previously of the president of the Portuguese Competition Authority in Lisbon and head of unit at DG Competition, so an incredible wealth of experience there. Before I come to you with the first question, and I'm going to let each of my speakers lay out their stall with the first question, I just want to give you a chance to say a few words. I think that's what you wanted to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katrina, and good afternoon to all the participants and the speakers in this event that marks, as the Commissioner said, the end of a road and the beginning of a new one, and we hope a longer and wealthier road. Because what we are ending with this and celebrating with this event is the end of 18 pilots, which were extremely important for us to adapt this incredible tool that was developed by Transparency International, which are the integrity pacts, to cohesion policy. But before we go to what we've learned, the challenges, I would just definitely would like to take the occasion to thank to all the civil society organizations who have monitored the projects that we were selected in these pilots, and they provided their expertise and support. To the project stakeholders who have the contracting authorities, the companies that have agreed to be monitored, because without these important actors, we wouldn't be here today. And because by doing so, they have accepted that transparency in their proceedings. And they have themselves become the best examples. So as we are entering an Olympic season, allow me this metaphor, they have become the flag bearers of the core values of integrity in public spending. And this is exactly what we wanted to have adapted to the cohesion policy world. So a big thank you to all of you, and of course to Transparency International for this important and so enriching partnership.
Thank you very, very much. And what I'm going to do, if we can bring all the speakers together again, actually, I know I'm keeping Lucas on his toes. Sorry, Lucas, because I think it's quite nice. Otherwise, everybody else has to sit there and feel like a lemon. So I just want to tell the audience who each of you are. We've got Katalin. Please do wave, Katalin, because we don't have your name straps at the moment. So you can do a wave. We've got Katalin Cseh, who was elected as a momentum movement, so part of the Renew Europe party group MEP in the 2019 European election, and she is also critically a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs and the Subcommittee on Human Rights and Delegation for Relations with the USA, and she has acted as shadow rapporteur in reports that are related to cohesion policy, particularly in the protection of the EU's financial interests and combating fraud. And she co-founded the Momentum Movement Group in Hungary. So thank you very much. One always has to have those sort of beatific smiles, don't you, while we sort of download who you are. We've got Helen Darbishire. Helen Darbishire, you probably don't need to say hello because I think we can figure out the maths of who you must be with who's left and who's spoken. Helen is a human rights activist specialising in the right of access to information and the development of open and democratic societies with critically participatory and accountable governments. She established, she'll say a few words more about this when I pose her a first question, Access Info in Madrid in 2006. So it does what it says on the tin, if I'm right, promoting the right to information across Europe and globally. But let me say, because we did talk about this morning when we met, you're also a member of the steering committee of the Open Government Partnership and chair of the UNCAC. Why did I pronounce it UNCAC? That was terrible, wasn't it? Coalition. So welcome to you. And just for those who don't know, that Access Info Europe is a Madrid-based human rights organisation. So that's where you're joining us from today. And Sergejus, where are you, please? Sergejus Muravjovas, you're executive director with a very regal wave at Transparency International Lithuania and have been there since 2008 in that role. You're very hot on anti-corruption initiatives that lead to sustainable and measured change, and you have served, I think, 2 terms on the TI International Board of Directors. So there we go. I think we can safely say they're all incredibly brainy, and therefore we know they should be here on this panel. So let me come to you first, please, to our director. Very obvious question. We heard a little bit from the Commissioner, but perhaps you can expand on that. The Commission's expectations when they partnered with Transparency International to embed these IPs in the EU-funded contracting projects, how do you specifically see, how would you describe the way that they can help bridge that gap between EU citizens and EU policies, which is something always critical for the EU?
Well, Katrina, when we learned about the tool that had developed by Transparency International, and knowing that here in the Commission, in the DG Regio, we work a lot with the public administration to empower them to so that they do the public spending as the best that they can do of it. And we know that how complex a public procurement is. So, and if you have the background that cohesion policy is about 400 billion of the EU budget that is spent by public authorities in the different member states with very different cultures and very different capabilities, we just grabbed this tool and did the learnings from Transparency International. And we said, okay, let's adapt that to cohesion policy. Let's see how it works. And that's how the 18 pilots came about. So to basically to use the fact that we have this background of a lot of public spending, a lot of public procurement. I forgot to say that half of the spending is via public procurement, and very different cultures across Europe in public spending and in how to implement these public procurement procedures. So actually the integrity pacts, they have these fantastic 3 ingredients that were very, that had it were very adaptable to cohesion policy and very useful to cohesion policy. And how do we bridge the gap with citizens? Well, we all know, we've heard too often that when we invest, we promote these investments by sponsor of the world, by the European Union in the member states. Often we hear, well, but it all goes into politicians' pockets. It's all down the drain because the processes are corrupted. And so this, of course, mines, as Delio Rubio said in the very beginning, this mines the trust that citizens have in the EU. So it is paramount to make these public procurement procedures more transparent, that the public authorities are more accountable, and that citizens are more engaged in these proceedings. And that's what the Integrity Pact's tools are so useful for.
Thank you very much. And indeed, and you reflect there what we did hear from Delia at the beginning when she said with the Eurobarometer, was it 52% of people kind of think that public contracts are the result of, are absolutely awash with bribes. They come about through non-competitive tenders. It is very depressing, though I'm not surprised, but I'm depressingly not surprised. So let me turn to our MEP next, if I may, and get right stuck in with the kind of what's the EU doing right and what could it do more of? Because we are at this point where we're kind of coming to the end of this pilot and looking at it. So let's have a look at the good stuff, and let's have a look at what more could be done to prevent this misuse of EU funds and this really efficient, I think the Commissioner used that word, timely and efficient use of money, not least because the whopping funding coming up has to be spent pretty swiftly. Thank you. Are
Thank
you
you
on?
very much. And first of all, sorry? Hello.
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me on this panel. I hope everything works. So that's a very good question that you posed to me. And I would like to start with the optimistic angle, because I think we have a lot to be proud of. The last couple of years, we indeed managed to achieve some very significant breakthroughs in the Union, be it the installation of the European Public Prosecutor's Office or the rule of law conditionality mechanism, which is, I believe, a groundbreaking new instrument that was negotiated a couple of years ago. I think that we have achievements, but also there are some other things that we have to improve on. And I would definitely would say that it's not enough to have institutions and bodies, but it's very, very significant to also give them support, give them powers, give them staffing, give them capacity and legal chances in order to achieve their goals. And here we are really lacking, because I believe that every single euro cent you spend on fighting financial crime, it is actually not a spending but an investment. And yet every time I speak with be it Olaf, be it EPO, or be other European anti-fraud bodies, the first thing they mention to me that they don't have enough people. They have a lot of tasks to do, but they just don't have the capacity to fulfill their duties. Of course, it's a costly endeavor, I have to say, but it is really saving us money on the long run. Right now, the EU institutions only have the resources to monitor about 5 to 10% of the EU spending. This is not so much, if you think about it. And the other 90% is left for the member states to look after. And if the member state chooses not to monitor, for instance, some investments that are tied to politically connected people or to friends or family members of somebody in government, well, then the EU doesn't have a capacity to control our European joint spending. That it is not only the problem of one single member state, I have to say, but the problem for the entire community, that we don't have the necessary capacities to check where our money goes. And also, how do we check where our money goes? It's not only people and personnel, but it's also the methods we are using. I sometimes feel that we are a bit stuck in the past when it comes to our databases.
Sure.
We have an extreme amount of parallel databases which are not integrated, which are not machine readable, bringing about more digitalization, more data-driven in our controlling mechanism. It could make like really an immense impact on how do we detect wrongdoing and crime. And
can I ask you to round off there, if I may?
monitoring?
Can I ask you to round off?
Of course, yes.
No, if you want to make a last point, but I'm just.
So I just wanted to add one thing, that monitoring, this is one step, but what we also have to do is to ensure that there are consequences on the EU level, and this is where we are also lacking some, despite all the great advances we made, but I hope we will have time to elaborate on that in the next part of the panel, because it is really crucial.
Absolutely. It's totally crucial. It's part of the whole puzzle. It's part of the journey. What's the point if there are no consequences? But yes, we will have time. Thank you so very much. And I do hear you, because funnily enough, last October, I did moderate an event for DG Justice on digitalization of all of that whole sphere of the justice system. And I did have from the EPPO, from Olaf, people there in a panel who say and echo exactly your words there in terms of human capital and in terms of, kind of stuck in a lot of paper. So let me come next, if I may, to Helen Darbishire. And what's great is that I think you can help take us a little bit further afield in this, because as I say, you wear all sorts of hats and you can bring in a little bit more of the global context and sort of broaden this to give us a feel of I think, what a package of kind of transparency mechanisms needs to be in place to really ensure this oversight. And you said it yourself when we spoke, you said, Katrina, taxpayers' money. So give us a little bit of a broader insight into what you see those mechanisms should be.
Thank you very much, Katrina, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Transparency International for this important event. It was interesting to hear the Commissioner saying that there will be a series of events. There are also events being organised by the Open Government Partnership with a high-level panel on the 15th of March to discuss transparency of EU funds. So we're all talking about it. We're all talking about it because we know it's very important. We know it's important that there be transparency, that there be citizen and civil society oversight by journalists, the social watchdogs. And we know that it's important that there be participation in the decision making. We all agree on that. So what are the actual mechanisms that we need to put in place to make that happen? And I think we also know what those mechanisms are. There are a series of mechanisms that have been identified. We've already heard about the importance of transparency in public procurement, but not all this money is being spent via public procurement. So we need also to have transparency when the funds are spent more directly. We need publication of the names of the beneficiaries, the identities of the beneficiaries of the funds. We need complementary mechanisms, such as opening up beneficial ownership registers and company registers. And yet there immediately we know we've got a problem, because under the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, all countries are supposed to have in place a beneficial ownership register, and not all have that, including, as I understand, for example, Italy, Hungary, and to a certain extent, Cyprus. We know that there's been some delays on implementing the Open Data Directive, which should be opening up company registers. Yesterday, news came out that the EU is bringing infringement proceedings against 24 EU member states because they haven't implemented the Whistleblower Directive, which was supposed to be transposed into national law by the end of last year. So I think one of the questions that it's useful to ask ourselves today is whether or not we've really put in place sufficiently strong mechanisms to permit us to deliver the oversight that we're talking about. And I hear the Commissioner Ferreira, saying that they're doing training on capacity building. But these are very soft mechanisms. We've got rules on public procurement. We saw during the pandemic how not every country is fully implementing the public procurement rules and ensuring sufficient levels of transparency. And just to finish for this first section, clearly one of the issues is political will to implement these mechanisms. And the other, as we've just heard very rightly from Katalin, Cseh, is the issue of resources. So we know what we want to do. We need to analyse why we're not doing it and where are the resources to make sure that it happens. And I would suggest that we look those issues squarely in the face and see if we can come up with some recommendations and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to turn directly to you, if I may, Sergejus, and just to give you a chance, and particularly because you are so steeped in this, very grassroots level, for want of a better word, of mechanisms or tools that you think the EU is missing that can be incorporated to fight against corruption. Well, across the board, we heard it's broader than this. It's not just public procurement, but let's, particular focusing on the protection of public funds because of what we know is coming up in terms of that delivery of that incredible package. So give us your thoughts, please, and based upon your experience.
So thank you so much for having me. Hello, everybody. I was sitting there and thinking that in a way, I feel like um, a sailor after a long haul voyage because it's been 6 years and counting us dealing with integrity pacts, and it has been an unprecedented deep dive into something which has never been done before to this scale, and I'm happy we've done it. And for instance, in Lithuania, we still are in the process of monitoring the initiative that we selected to monitor. First and foremost. But there are a couple of key takeaways that perhaps we can use for the sake of our discussion, and I would very much like to present to you. One is that integrity pacts do offer a clear message that a data-driven approach is key for us to be successful in our anti-corruption efforts in the future. And what I mean by that is that we need to rely much more on usable, open, comparable, and as real-time as possible data for us to be able to ask key questions, for our colleagues in procuring institutions to be able to justify their decisions well enough, and also to manage risks accordingly. And that also means that the second takeaway probably would be that we do need to work better on our anti-corruption literacy. AC literacy is key if we actually want to make sure that we spend public funds well enough. And by anti-corruption literacy, I don't mean the literacy of our public in general. I mean concrete institutions, people who work on public procurement. Because what we have found, and I think it's a fair assessment, is that in many procuring institutions, people responsible for decision making really do not manage corruption risks well enough. And they don't ask themselves questions about conflict of interest prevention. They don't spend enough time on internal reporting channels. And when that issue comes across throughout the entire organization, that of course is a problem, and that really makes the entire process of monitoring something like an integrity pact into a much more complex process. And the last takeaway would be is that we are ripe for more creative monitoring and citizen engagement. And by that, I mean guidelines are great, and we need guidelines. Formats are key. We need to make sure that institutions that really are keen to engage citizens offer them right formats and environments to do so. However, we also need to apply multi-speed approach when dealing with monitoring and engagement. And by that, I mean that it's great to have IPs, and it's great to have such organizations like TI and other similar public policy institutions to be engaged in large infrastructure projects. But it's clear that there are more opportunities for us out there, and we can actually make IPs work on, for instance, smaller scales. And in Lithuania, just to give you an example, we have precisely done that. We have taken out the DNA of an IP and put it into something which has been there for many years, called participatory budgeting. And we see that when it's a smaller scale initiative, it also works. It's just that we've taken out a lot of insights from our work on integrity pacts, and now it's citizens who decide on 10,000, 20,000 euros. It's municipalities who deal with much smaller projects, and it requires much less amount of time, fewer resources, and that already is a success as well. So for me, as I mentioned, this data-driven approach, this anti-corruption literacy, and creative monitoring are key takeaways that I hope we can use for our future work on anti-corruption indeed.
Thank you very much. Before I come back to Sofia, because I would like to give our director a chance to respond, just to come back to you, because Katalin and Helen, there was this kind of crossover in terms of where you wanted to just expand a little bit. So just talk about that, Katalin. I mean, you were saying, and there needs to be more consequences at EU level there. You were saying when I said, please round off, and, kind of what other sort of punitive instruments do you think could be adopted? So just give me a brief answer to that, and then perhaps Helen, you can come in, because you were saying, look, Kat, we've got these infringement proceedings, and some things feel a little bit too soft. So I don't know whether both of you want to add to that before I come back to Sofia and then put her in the spotlight again. Katalin.
Well, I believe that we can do two things. First, use our existing instruments better. Second is to devise new instruments that help us to give more weight to our words. You talk about infringements, and of course, it's a very useful method. However, unfortunately, these processes have been very slow. Very often, the decision arrives at a point where it's hard to reverse the original problem upon which the infringement was ruled for. And also in my country, in Hungary, we also saw a number of instances where the rulings after the infringements were not followed up on. So now we are in this like endless legal battle. It's not as it would be such a strong deterrent. But the other maybe more specific things that we could do is to push for the methods that we have to be actually utilized. The rule of law conditionality mechanism that I mentioned has been in law for like a very long time now. Still, it hasn't been used because of there is always some good excuse why to postpone it. Guidelines, court rulings, you name it. Just as if any decisions that are a bit political or a bit confrontative, maybe they are put to rest more than they should. And one more thing, and I stop here, but maybe it's good to consider. I heard from the Commission already that they seriously consider extending the EU blacklisting system, the so-called EDIS system, not only to projects that are in central management, but also to the shared management projects. Basically, this means that if you committed fraud repeatedly, you won't be given a next chance to apply for money. So it's very important, I believe, to have a real strong deterrent that if somebody is caught with problematic behavior, then they are held back from trying for new applications. Now, this system is very underused, in my opinion, and it really should cover shared management. I think that's a good way to go, but once again, I hope that we'll see swift action here and less hesitation, maybe.
Okay, just before I come back to Sofia, Helen, anything you wanted to expand upon, or from what you heard there?
Particular point, perhaps. As has already been said, we're spending a huge amount of money very fast. And when that happens, there are various risks. Two specifically. One is that the money will be misspent, it will be subject to fraud or corruption. And the other is it simply won't be particularly well spent on the objectives. What's very good about the risk recovery package is that it's supposed to be spent in an iterative process where there are periodic checks about whether or not the funding is actually being used in ways that relate to the goals, the objectives. But how is that going to be verified if the data on how the money is being spent isn't fully transparent, both at the national level and is fully available at the EU level? How are we going to have investigative journalists checking for corruption? How are we going to know if it's really green and clean unless the civil society watchdogs, the environmental groups who know about this, are able to obtain the data? And that's where we've got a problem, because in their spending plans, in their recovery package plans, not all member states have committed to fully open data. And we've even had last year the head of OLAF, the EU's anti-fraud agency, saying that it's not only a question of resources, they don't have the information. Not all countries are uploading data into the Arachne tool, and this tool is not open. So it's very clear that if we are to have this oversight, we do need to have the data published.
Okay, thank you very much. So, I mean, Sofia, we talk. We talk so much. We all know that we talk so much about EU roles member state role in everything. I don't just mean in this area. What is the role of civil society, of academia, of business, of this, of that? So, I mean, let me just ask first a response to that, what you hear in terms of the EU's role in enforcement, in really following up on infringement, using, what we have better, that we also heard there from our MEP, but also, some of the challenges that are there that perhaps you haven't been explicitly stated, particularly coming up in this new programming period, and where you do see that the citizen engagement, which this legacy is trying, to push in contributing to addressing them. So let me give you a chance to just reflect back on what you heard there, and then to talk about how you think citizen engagement can really help in proper and efficient expenditure of those funds.
Well, what we heard is that the glass is still half full. Of course, there are many mechanisms at EU level, and I'm talking about the control mechanisms of EU funding, of EU spending, of spending EU money. And of course, this is, and I think it's very important that everybody is aware here that this is done in partnership with the member states. So, I mean, we heard throughout the different speakers that we need to have the commitment of the member states, of the public authorities, for them to have sufficiently strong mechanisms at national level. Actually, the Commission, for example, on cohesion spending, we control the controllers, we control the mechanisms, and we audit the audit controllers in the different member states. So it's important to have robust legal framework, which we are improving it, and in the very different fronts. We are improving the data collection databases, the search in the databases through artificial intelligence. So the Arachnid tool is not a perfect tool, but it's definitely a very important tool. And we have others like the early detection and inclusion system tool. So we are working on the different fronts: regulation, having the data available, and having the possibility to search within the data. We have tightened the control mechanisms in this last framework. So the legal framework that packages this next EU budget, if you want, the 2027. We have created other mechanisms such as the rule of law conditionality regulation on the public spending. So the criteria, the conditions for EU funding are stringent, and now we have to work all together to make that applicable in practice and more transparent, and the authorities and member states more accountable. And there's, of course, a lot to be done. On the role of citizens' engagement, I mean, for us, this is paramount, and this is probably one of the weakest links of all this important puzzle, because you can have perfect legislation, you can have perfect or almost perfect controllers, but if you don't have the citizens engaged in how the money is spent, if you don't have the citizens organizations engaged in monitoring and oversighting these processes, and especially the public procurement process, which is the theme of the topic of this session, then you don't have the transparency, and you won't have the accountability from the public authorities. So it's very important to have all the mechanisms in place, but it's very important for citizens to demand from their public authorities, to demand from their member states that they comply with the regulation, and that they actually, the money is well spent. And this is an important link to strengthen. And that's why all the citizen engagement, they may be soft tools at the moment. We recognize that there's not a lot of tradition in the member states to involve the citizens in the decision making, how the money is spent, in the decision making, in the making of public procurement. And this is what we're trying to instill through the negotiations, for example, of this next programming period.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think forgive me, because I was just having a check. I'm not looking at my phone because I'm ordering dinner, ladies and gentlemen. I'm looking at my phone because that's where the questions come to me, because we, as you know, can't see it on this platform. So when I'm occasionally looking down, were you just talking in terms, because I was following, also checking in there about the use of artificial intelligence in the prevention of corruption. We heard there just momentarily. Do you want to, I think I can see that there's some interest in the audience in that. Is there anything that you or any of the other speakers might just briefly want to touch on there? Any experience, any thoughts? Because interestingly, Normally you get a question on, oh gosh, artificial intelligence and the fears around it. I know that's shifting a bit, but here we have what is the potential in the prevention of corruption? Did you, Sergejus, you're nodding. Was it?
Sure, but maybe somebody else wants to take the floor first. I'm absolutely okay if it's the...
Well, we haven't heard from you for a bit, but I think come in first, and then Katalin. Let me hand to you because I think you raised your hand. Yes.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. Actually, I thought it's time to make a point that in principle, we cannot assume that this anti-corruption business as usual can last for much longer. And I do think that we essentially need to revamp our theory of change, the way we approach anti-corruption in the EU. And citizen engagement is not a part of patchwork, right? It basically is keeping on pace with times that are changing. And that's where technology and artificial intelligence comes in. I mean, because let's be brutally honest, with greater technology in our public sector, with artificial intelligence being part and parcel of decision making, the knowledge asymmetry is more likely to increase than not. And with the increase in knowledge asymmetry, what might happen is that even fewer people will understand what needs to be procured, what needs to be bought, and the possibilities to monitor and ask questions will actually diminish. So that's where it all comes in. You know, technology is a great thing. However, it also means that you do need to make sure that there are more checks and balances in place. And by that, I mean greater openness, and that's where open data standards come in. And it's not only openness of data, it's also openness to change. And for that, I think we need to shed away this assumption that law enforcement and monitoring agencies will do the job for us, because clearly they're not capable of doing that just by themselves. And it's absolutely okay that we kind of thank this neoliberal approach to anti-corruption for all the good things that it has done over the past 20 or 30 years, but also embrace this behavioralistic, big data-driven approach, going from macro and meso levels to this micro level of analysis. Because let's look at IPs. Integrity pacts are about micro level engagement, where you dig deep and you understand how things work. And then from that micro level, you take it on and bring it out onto the macro level and national policy engagement again. So to me, that's where technology comes in. This is where AI comes in. And my last point would be that general data protection regulation is also something we should be aware of, because what I see is that, well, it's a great thing. A lot of nation states over the past couple of years have misconstrued what it actually means for the public sector. And there's a real threat that certain data that was available before can get closed off, and that will actually diminish our capacity to really engage in proper anti-corruption work. And I think that's something which the Commission can play a big role in, just transmitting the message that that's not what the General Data Protection Regulation was intended for.
I think also in the part, and I'll just finish there, and I'm keeping my eye on the time because we have a few more questions I'd like to share with you. Also for me with AI, I mean, one has to have a think, because particularly, again, with smaller projects, smaller contractors, smaller companies, there is less capacity with that. So often that is something that I think needs to be really, really thought about when AI is used in the prevention of corruption, to make sure that all actors, and I'm including the smaller actors from a kind of a business and a company's point of view, are also around the table. I have a question for Sofia, but I'm going to hold on it just for a moment. If you want to come in on AI, Katalin, can you keep it really short, please? Can I ask you to be concise? Did you want to add something? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a very brief comment on keeping in mind, of course, everything the previous speaker said, but I still think it's like a tremendous opportunity to enhance our capacities to look through all these extremely numerous databases on a lot of different languages, a lot of different ways of collecting data. As we spoke about the resources at the beginning, it's just like would require so much personnel if we wouldn't rely on the technology that we have in hand. So I just think that it's a tremendous opportunity, of course, given its risks. But I'm very glad to hear that the Commission is very dedicated on a greater amount of digitalization, which would also cover crime fighting. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking at the possible potential opportunities here.
Indeed, and also I think from what I hear a lot is just in the reporting back mechanisms alone, which are entirely complicated. I think there could be plenty of opportunity in that, because it seems to me that so much is being lost there, and there's quite a lot of darkness because it is complex and it is not streamlined. Let me come just to sort of keep balanced, Helen. I was going to come to you. You were talking about, you'd added a little bit to saying where you think enforcement could be improved. You brought up this issue of data. Anything else that you would say in your experience, just a couple of challenges faced, a couple of steps need to be taken? I mean, for the different stakeholders, whether it's beneficiaries, I think you called the journalists the social watchdogs, for companies. What can you put out there where you say, right, this is my advice, this is what we've seen, and this is what we need to do?
Okay, thanks. Before I do that, can I just say very much to second the point that Sergejus was making, the concern that a misconstruing of the General Data Protection Regulation is hampering access to information right now, be it information about beneficiaries, recipients of funds, or owners of companies, in a way that could seriously frustrate our oversight efforts from civil society. We need to understand that when companies, even individuals, receive significant quantities of public funding or are given permission to run and operate companies acting in the public sphere, then and receive, those companies receive money, we should be able to find out who is getting that money. And data protection shouldn't be an obstacle to that, because we're putting in the balance of data protection some other very important public goods and interests, which are fighting against corruption and ensuring that this recovery package is spent in a way that really does help us recover from the pandemic and address the pressing challenge of climate change. In terms of the role of civil society and investigative journalists, there are some very exciting initiatives, some exciting things happening right now, very specifically focused on the recovery funds. So we have a new coalition just formed in the last few months, which Access Info is proud to be a founder member of, which is the Open Spending EU Coalition. It's still growing. We've got more organizations from different member states joining. And we're working together to share experience and learning on how to monitor the spending of these funds and how to do advocacy for greater transparency so that we can monitor better. And we're also collaborating as a regional network with a new network of journalists, the Follow the Money Recovery Files project, which I think is going to launch its first investigation. Well, it's done one report. Some more news stories being launched tomorrow and the next day, so look out for those. We already have in place networks of the social watchdogs. It is the right term of art. The big challenge we have is the funding to do our work. And I'm very concerned to learn that even with the integrity packs, which we're here to talk about today, the continuation of the integrity packs is not guaranteed because it's not 100% clear to what extent there's going to be funding to do them, at least on the same scale. I think if we really care about ensuring that this money that's being spent, this huge amount of money, is well spent, then a certain percentage of that going from the Commission and from the member states into ensuring that civil society can play its role would be very important indeed. We know what we have to do. We know what we can do as civil society. We know where to look. It's great to talk about artificial intelligence, but there's nothing like good old human intelligence to identify where there are problems. But to do that, we do need to have the resources put into that dimension of this common project that we have with the recovery funds.
Thank you. I love that. Yes, absolutely. Artificial intelligence has its role, and so does human intelligence has its role to uncover what is in the dark. Now, just let me stay with you momentarily, because we've got a few people interested in just sticking with this issue of funding. But I mean, would you propose just one or two, or maybe you'll say no, Katrina, I can't. Is there easily accessible EU funding for watchdog activities by NGOs, if we're, with reference to EU project planning, spending, monitoring? And that's for you, Helen.
Oh, well, I haven't got them. I thought it was for the Commission. I haven't seen yet. We obviously keep an eye on the calls for proposals coming out of the Commission. There's some proposals now under the Ethics, Rights and Values budget line for citizen participation at a more grassroots level, for example, and for some human rights related work. But that includes things like explaining the Charter of Fundamental Rights to the citizens, which is important. It is important, but I would say there's nothing more important than combating corruption, because as we heard at the top with Delia Ferrer Rubio, it is a perception of corruption which undermines trust in the democratic project. So what we'd really like to see is specific lines of funding for those organizations that are engaged in monitoring and calling out problems with the spending of these funds. And I haven't seen those budget lines being announced yet. I'd love to hear from the Commission whether they are around the corner or not.
May I do so? I mean, I was going to thank you, Helen. I was going to bring you in, Sofia, because that's a question that quite a few people in the audience are interested in. I mean, is there indeed a line of funding? How can you shed
Well,
some light?
I don't know if there is a specific line of funding for NGOs who combat fraud and corruption, but that we definitely have lots of lines of funding to promote better transparency and citizens' engagement and participatory mechanisms in the EU funds, and specifically in cohesion funds. So we have those are calls launched directly by the Commission, and then the member states in their programs, they also have a specific funding for what we call technical assistance. This can be capacity building of the public administrations, for example, for them to detect conflict of interest, corruption, to promote integrity pacts, but also for civil society, and also to develop other programs of citizens engagement, in the sense of bringing the citizens in the decision making, such as participatory budgets. So we're also working on a number of funding calls for those type of projects. So yes, there are many calls at the moment. I don't know if there is one specific for anti-corruption, but that's definitely there is a lot of money available at the Commission level and also at the member states level.
Okay, let me just stay with you, because I'm just aware that we got sort of 7 minutes, all of us, before I lead our audience and your good selves into a coffee break, and then the second half of the event. So I just something important, and I think it's of interest, is what are the anti-corruption requirements that are included in the partnership agreements and the operational programs, and are these strong enough? I mean, I think obviously, but this is what is coming again and again. Is this strong enough? Is EU enforcement strong enough? Is this rigorous enough? Is this going to do the job? So please let me hear from you on that. What are the requirements included in the partnership agreements and operational programs? How do you see those? Strong enough?
Well, remember, it's very simple. Member states have to comply with EU law for us to implement for them to implement the programs and for us to do the payments. So if anti-corruption laws are part of the EU law and are part of, and also national law, corruption is a crime, bribery is a crime, and so that member states have to comply with it. And what we have a number of control mechanisms, auditing, checks, and control, and that can lead to suspension of payments if irregularities. It doesn't have to be corruption. We're always talking about corruption. There are a number of there's a space of compliance with the law, EU and national law, that is checked and monitored. And if the managing authorities, for example, have not complied with the law, if there is an illegality, an irregularity, it doesn't have to go all the way to corruption and bribery. That's the most severe type of incompliance and illegality. Then we deduct the money from the program. The member states does not receive that money. EU fund is not spent for that project. So that is happening as we speak regarding many member states. So that is the first, let's say, that's the usual control mechanisms that we have. What we would really like to have is to have, in addition to those control mechanisms, oversight from the EU and the member states, because there are a number of authorities, and each member state has one authority dedicated to the control and the checks, the audits of the spending of cohesion and in EU money. And they work, and they work. I mean, we're giving the impression that there's lots of corruption and lots of fraud in the spending of, for example, of cohesion money, but this is not the case. It is a minority. But of course, those are the cases that we normally read in the newspapers. And those are the cases that need to be addressed because they give the wrong perception of how the money of cohesion money, for example, is being spent by the member states. And we need to tackle those very seriously. And for that, we also have Olaf, and we now have the European public prosecutors, and we have a number of checks and balances and control mechanisms. What we would like to see more is integrity pacts in the next programming period. And it was mentioned before here, funding. The pilots were indeed funded by the European Commission directly, so budget of the European Commission. But we want member states to take ownership of this project. We want to encourage them, and this is part of the, the aim and the objective of, for example, this event. It's also the result of the learnings of these pilot projects. They were embedded and integrity pacts in a practical guide that we are publishing today, and I would like not to miss the opportunity to publicize it, to encourage the national authorities to use the integrity pacts in the forthcoming period that we're still negotiating with the member states, and also for them to know that this is a win-win for everyone, because it's not only about mitigating the risks of conflict of interest or corruption, it's also allowing them to use and to comply with the law in the best possible manner, to understand the market, to understand the value of the service or of the goods that they want to procure, so to adjust the finance, the value of the procurement to what they really need. So there's a big learning curve. And because there's a big learning curve, it would be very good for them to, and for all of us to have those more in the next programming period.
Okay, thank you very much. Perhaps now, Lucas, you can leave us all full screen, because I want to just ask two more questions, and it's going to encourage people to be as concise as possible. I have a question for you, Sergejus. I'm going to put sort of a couple of questions together, and then I'm going to come back to our MEP, because you are representing the citizens of Europe, let's just put it that very simply. And so I want to just understand a little bit more from you, because I didn't prod there, on what you see as the role of civil society in really, bringing about these instruments and making them work. But really, ladies and gentlemen, it's got to be top line Morse code comms, just the key messages for our audience, because I need to release them to air their brains. Now, you said, Sergejus, that you talked about some recommendations, not least that IPs could probably work really, really well in smaller projects. You talked about this data-driven approach. Helen brought that up, some more creative monitoring, but just within the Lithuanian context, just to understand, that you're not necessarily always reinventing the wheel. How does your experiences of implementing the IP connect to other measures and initiatives that are already going on in the field, whether it's open contracting data or other? Could you just give us a whiff of your experience there, and then segue into, well, Kat, these would be my main takeaways, therefore, in the implementation of IPs, also taking into account that relationship and how it fits with other initiatives. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, that's quite a task. They take it as a compliment. So just to be brief, we have taken on this anthropological approach to IPs. And what I mean by that is that it really was and is a handful, because it's a huge infrastructure project. You need to be able to pace yourself accordingly, understand when things will take place. And it looks like, for instance, in our case, we have taken on the commitment to be there one way or the other, even in a couple of years from now, when, EC funding is over. And I do think this is something which has to be taken on by our colleagues in the Commission and anybody else who wants to be engaged in something like that. But what I would like to bring across is that IPs are not just about project monitoring. It's about figuring out what makes a successful monitoring initiative, really. And when I spoke about participatory budgeting, I meant that our IP DNA has already mutated a little bit, if I may use this analogy these days, and now we use it in participatory budgeting. Half of our municipalities in Lithuania now actually engage citizens in this kind of work, and this is an amazing step change in comparison to what we had just a few years back. And IP logic, lessons learned, successes achieved, very much informs our engagement and the engagement of municipalities that often disperse the same EC money or national budgets just in smaller chunks. So to me, it really is about being open to different kind of speeds and understanding that infrastructure projects are key when it comes to creating a sort of clear example on the national level. But then when it comes to citizen engagement, you do need to think of motivation there, and you need to understand that smaller chunks are just more digestible. You don't eat a whale in one go. You split it up, right? And you actually then do it in a manageable manner. And here, a couple of takeaways. You know,
You don't eat it at all. That's what I was just going to say. Sorry, you were so mid-flow when you say don't. Hopefully you don't eat the whale at all, whether in big chunks or small. But I was just bringing a bit of levity to your
I once had some whale. I apologize for that. But that was in Greenland.
Elephant. Whatever. So, hopefully we don't eat an elephant. So anyway, sorry I interrupted you. So you said making those small projects that are very meaningful because you're going to get more ownership from civil society if the projects are more accessible.
About your own township, but it's about your own street. It's just more relatable. But the bottom line is that you do need good examples. Transparency is a habit, and it is created through such meaningful small success stories. And that's where, you know, if I could share two of my dreams, I actually do see a greater role of the European Commission, because I do think that the offices of the European Commission in our capitals and elsewhere can take on a greater moderator's role and become the centers of these brainstorming exercises, these sort of forums that actually encourage forward thinking. And for that, you don't need a lot of resources. All you need is leadership. And if you can acknowledge some good examples along the way, that's even better. Because at the end of the day, I think what we're facing here in DC is one huge task. And that is for the European Commission in a couple of years to be able to say, look, we actually have enough data and enough understanding on our hands to say that EC funds that are being spent on the national level are spent in a more transparent manner than the year before. And there are fewer corruption risks when it's about EC funds now than a few years back. And this is a huge challenge, which then goes back to big data, open data, anti-corruption literacy, and being able to monitor how you use your funding. Because if you're not able to answer this question,
I need to ask you to round off, Sergejus, please.
If you cannot answer this in a meaningful way, you know, then we have a problem. But otherwise, thank you so much.
No, sorry, and I just want to hear a bit of a just can we use the integrity pacts outside the EU too? There's a question.
Of course.
Is that a question to me or somebody else?
Helen. Sorry?
Yes, I mean, I think it's not for me to answer, but yes, integrity pacts as a methodology. There are other participatory methodologies. The Open Government Partnership Forums are getting good results in Portugal and in Italy, for example, on greater transparency around the RRF. Again, we have the mechanisms. It's a question of really putting them in place. We know what we should be doing. We need the resources and the political will to do it.
And over to you. Thank you to Katalin. I mean, you heard again this talk of, you know, projects need to be very relevant, very local, to have ownership. I was asking you about the role of civil society. Two things that you think very, very specific to the role of civil society that can really bring about the success of such instruments. Beautifully concise, please.
Well, the civil society has this extremely important role to keep us decision makers to account, and also to investigate even in those cases when the governments are maybe not eager. So this is why we lawmakers, we need to create laws that provide access of information for everybody who would like to control us. This is our duty as civil servants to open this possibility, because we can also learn from civil society cooperation. When I talk to NGOs, it's extremely useful for my legislative work. They are just so much more demanding, and I really welcome this pressure, because this is only how we as lawmakers could do better. If somebody is blowing the whistle and raising the alarm when it has to be done. So it is really an absolutely crucial role the civil society has to play. And also, just to close down, I think that transparency and integrity are like not only policy outcomes, but more like general values in society. And in order to foster them and to cultivate them, we really need a strong civil society, media, NGOs, public awareness, because otherwise it is just not possible to have these values spread across the society that we should actually be striving for.
Thank you. Before I ask you each to complete a sentence to close, I'm just curious. Sergejus, I think he only managed to say one of his two wishes there, because I sort of closed him in the interest of time. But what did you think about his suggestion there, where he said he thinks the Commission has a real role to play that wouldn't be so very, very costly, can kind of be that arbiter, can kindly be in that sort of at national level? Did that sort of speak to you? Did you catch that? Do you want to just repeat what your suggestion was, Sergejus?
Oh, so that was the question to me. I'm sorry
No.
about
I
that.
was asking Elisa. I was asking the Commission if that sort of spoke to you. What he had said, that would be on my wish list.
No, if I can respond to that, yes, absolutely. I mean, this is what we're doing today. This is what we've been playing with Transparency International and all the projects that we have in terms of citizens' engagement in general in public spending. And I think Sergei has mentioned the Commission offices in the different member states. I was the head of the Commission office in Lisbon for a while, and this is definitely the role of the Commission. It's to bridge the European Union to the citizens, and this is, public engagement in public spending is a very important topic of discussion. We know that there's less and less patience, tolerance from citizens with cases of corruption, of obscure and opaque public spending, and so we do have to discuss how we can best, what type of tools do we have at our disposal, not only to monitor that, to control that, but also to bring the citizens into not only the discussion but the decision making.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask all of you to complete this sentence before I take us into the coffee break. And I need to give just a couple of instructions to everybody, to the audience before the coffee break. Here we go. The most important action needed to achieve greater transparency, accountability, and integrity in the largest public procurement market in the world is, Helen, half a sentence. The most important action is needed to achieve that is?
Publish the data.
Publish the data. For you, Katalin. Or Sergejus first. I don't mind who. We're all on screen together. Most important action. Either of you. You speak when you like.
Create the possibilities. Also publish the data, but publish good data. Publish data that can be used, that can be searched, that are integrated, and also have the people who search and scrutinize the data.
Thank you. Sergejus.
Relatable good examples that inspire change. Relatable good examples.
And for you, Sofia Alves.
Well, commitment of the member states and public authorities to be more accountable and more transparent. Commitment is very important.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Huge, as you all know, we only ever managed to scratch the surface, although I do thank you for your very comprehensive and very targeted replies. I know you could say so much more. We did hear, I'm very, very fascinated about anti-corruption literacy, that was brought up there among those who really are working in that arena, so that there is a real understanding, where there are conflicts of interest. We talked about monitoring, about quality data, the right data. We talked about how important this is, otherwise it degrades trust. We had a little bit of a discussion there on, the EU infringement procedures, how it can really strengthen enforcement, use the existing mechanisms better, but we probably need some new ones. And thank you, Helen, so much for also sharing with us some of the transparency mechanisms and some of the other initiatives and forums and coalitions that are also available. And I hope that our audience can do a bit of sniffing around there and widen their understanding of this area. So thank you so very much. Now the audience and you may disappear for as long as you like. The audience can only disappear for 10 minutes to eat, to tweet. Don't forget, #IntegrityPanel.